the elevator to disgorge people. They come at clumps.
Truly feels. Oh. I think we're good to go.
Good morning. Welcome to this session of the Berlin Science Week on megatrends and future research. What we are going to do is to offer you an insight into megatrends research, into future research, presenting very briefly our book, and then engaging with the panelists, Dimitrios Margellos, GARRETT from the US, very seasoned megatrends researcher, and Victoria ESCOBAR, here from Berlin Institute for Urban Policy Research, in a panel discussion. What can you expect from these sessions? Not much of science fiction, but as I said, an introduction into megatrends and future research. John Naisbitt was one of the pioneers of megatrends research. He published his book, 10 Directions Transforming Our Lives, in 1982. It sold more than 14 million copies in 50 countries, and what he predicted was the change from industrialization to information societies. Since then, a lot of strategy consulting firms and think tanks have ventured into the topic of future research, researching on global trends and future developments. Dimitrios and myself, we published this book end of May this year on global perspectives on megatrends. We wanted to be a bit more global, more comprehensive, and we wanted to also collect perspectives from the global south. We cooperated with think tanks, researchers, and analysts from different world regions. John Naisbitt had published his book on the US, but he has also provided advisory services to many governments and policymakers across the world. Nowadays, and we will hear more from GARRETT, most of the governments, especially in the US, in Canada, and in Europe, they work together with think tanks and are very keen on getting their advice on future directions. Why has it become so important to engage in future research? Our world has become VUCA. We live in a VUCA world, volatile, uncertain, complex, and ambivalent. And climate change, of course, is the prime example. We cannot exactly predict what will happen with planet Earth in 10 or 15 years, but we have robust data to tell us that we are going to face severe challenges related to the health of our planet. And it's much wiser to anticipate some of these developments than wait and see. The COVID-19 pandemic was another prime example why it is important trying to anticipate developments. And of course, new technologies, new technological opportunities, big data, artificial intelligence. We need to be prepared for big changes because those changes will not just remain in the domain of technology, but they will impact our lives, everybody's life. We have cooperated with think tanks, Denkfabriken in German, with different countries and nations. What is a think tank? I mean, when you ask a German about think tanks, some of them are still a little bit skeptical. They would think about the RAND Corporation in the US, Foreign and Security Policy think tank, or they would think about big lobby groups, big money influencing policies, especially in the US. But we've witnessed a proliferation of new kind of think tanks. Dimitrios is currently working with the Zoe Institute, a think tank based in Cologne, and I've been working with a couple of think tanks in India, in China, in other countries. Yeah? There's a global go-to think tanks report of the Pennsylvania University, and they list thousands of think tanks. There's also a ranking of these think tanks. You see some big names, and some of you have come across these big names like Carnegie, Bruegel, and Chatham House, of course. Most of them still in the US, but even here in Germany and in the global south, you have a large number of think tanks. What kind of conceptual frameworks are used to reflect and to act on future challenges for humanity? Most of you are probably familiar with the United Nations 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development. It was adopted by all member states of the United Nations at the 70th anniversary conference of the United Nations 2015 in New York, just 3 months ahead of the Paris Agreement. And it's a quite comprehensive agreement entailing not only the 17 SDGs, but also 169 targets and more than 232 indicators. It's mainly promoted by the United Nations and international organizations, a lot of international organizations actually, so-called custodian agencies, but also national governments, subnational governments, cities, and you will find reference to the SDG framework in sustainability reports of almost all multinational companies, including the financial industry. But of course, this is a kind of a top-down approach, which is closely monitored by the United Nations with targets and indicators. That's different than the Megatrends framework, which is more focusing on future opportunities. But opportunities and risks are very closely related, as the World Economic Forum pointed out. They have these global risk reports, which are very prominent, and they organize these sessions in Davos, where business leaders and some head of states meet every year. There are also some other frameworks, like the Planetary Boundary Framework, which defines the safe operating space for humanity, and it's basically about the health status of planet Earth. But let us focus a bit more on the Megatrends framework, which was kind of kick-started by the work of John Naisbitt. In Germany, you have a Zukunftsinstitut. They address a German-speaking audience. They don't publish much in English. They do wonderful work, and we have also cooperated with some of their experts. They visualize megatrends in a nice way. I just wanted to show you this picture. There are lots of similar diagrams on megatrends. Whether you put the key trends at the outskirts or at the center of the metro map is discussable, of course, but anyway, it's nice to see and good to digest. And we have worked with a pretty simple but concise framework for identifying these megatrends. I mean, the megatrends discourse is mainly pushed by consulting firms, by McKinsey in Germany, Roland Berger, Deloitte, and so on, but they don't care too much in defining the megatrends. They typically focus on the tech trends, demography, and perhaps some eco-trends. We wanted to adopt, Dimitrios and me wanted to adopt a more comprehensive approach to megatrends, and we looked at, are these trends really covered by research worldwide? Do they receive due global political attention, for example, by the G20 meetings? What is the interest of global investors or the attention paid by global investors to these trends? And we looked at global media coverage and also social activists, social movements. We have eventually come up with 12 megatrends: climate action and sustainability, digitalization, inequality, demography, urbanization and smart cities, health and nutrition, green economy, sustainable finance, multipolar world order, democracy and governance innovation, civilizational developments. Of course, it was most difficult to talk about civilizational developments across different cultures, across different political systems. We have still identified the diversity trend, individualization and loneliness, gender shift, and identity politics. And then we have migration. And we've written the book, we finished the book end of May 2022, and it looks like some of these trends, Dimitrios will talk about inequality, migration, these trends are yet to become stronger and stronger. Okay. I will not have the time to go deep into the trends. Of course, the climate action trend, it's the first and biggest chapter in our book. It's about investments in renewables. It's about investment in carbon capture and storage technologies. It's about emission trading, the cost-effective combination of buying or selling emission permits. It's about carbon neutrality strategies, policies, electromobility, environmental, social, and governance criteria for investments. Just let us have a look at how many countries, governments, provinces, cities have subscribed to zero carbon, carbon neutrality. According to confirmed pledges of the Carbon Neutrality Coalition, 733 cities, 31 regions, 3,670 business and 173 of the biggest investors, 622 of higher education institutes, including, of course, Freie Universität Berlin. I think we were one of the first to commit to carbon neutrality. And there's a race to carbon zero campaign, you can say. So that shows you how deep and how broad this trend is. Major consulting firms are also doing a lot of work on decarbonization strategies, and if you believe you can ignore that trend or you can ridicule this trend, then you will fear some some severe consequences. Like the head of a major bank, HSBC, in Britain, he was fired after he gave a speech saying that the credit cycle of a bank spans for only 6 years, sometimes 8 years, and that the consequences of climate change would not that seriously impact the work of his bank. And that was not acceptable because any of the big banks are supposed to play a leading role nowadays in designing climate action plans. Yeah. I'm having a slide of one of our guests, Jana Lipenkova, and she's engaging in AI-based, artificial intelligence-based monitoring of megatrends. What we have done, and Dimitrios will tell you later, is we have talked with experts from different countries, regions, from different disciplinary backgrounds. We have read a lot of reports from the World Economic Forum, other flagship reports, Carnegie, from consulting firms. That's the way we identified the trends and the sub-trends. But there's also opportunity to do it in a different, more technology-savvy way. And if you want to say a few words about it, you can just come, and before we hand over to Dimitrios, because Jana has to leave earlier.
Oh, we do need a
Yes,
microphone.
Give her a mic.
Thank you. Yeah, thanks a lot, Berthold, for mentioning Anacode, which is my company. And basically, we were really excited by the publication of the book by Berthold and Dimitrios. And this is why we also took the initiative to propose some cooperation. So the thing is that at Anacode, we work in a data-driven manner. So we really try to monitor and conceptualize the mega trends. Currently, we have a focus on digitalization and sustainability using data. So most of the information that we get about mega trends is information that can be found online in different kinds of publications. So starting with the scientific press, but then also going into the business press, then consumer publications, and so on. And we really believe that that's important to monitor this information on a global and dynamic basis, because a trend is always something that's dynamic. And the research study using classical methodology that you do today, it will be basically outdated in some months or well, let's say maximally a year. Yeah, and that's why we really believe it's very important to monitor the megatrends themselves, but then also to see what are actually the topics that constitute the megatrend. Yeah, because now we have, for instance, this big topic of digitalization, but what are the main technologies like cybersecurity, AI, aerospace, and so on that make up this trend? And we really believe that there are many interactions with everything else that's going on in the world, and there you really need a data-driven and AI-based methodology to model all of this dynamically.
Thank you very much, Jana. And we are now proceeding to our methodology. And of course, we also focused on how these trends, these mega trends, are intersected with each other. And I think Dimitrios will focus on the intersection of the climate action and sustainability, digitalization and inequality, and also gender shift trend. So the floor is yours.
Right. So one thing that we want to acknowledge is that this book was developed through an understanding of diversity of opinions. And beyond the 37 expert interviews that we integrated into the book from diverse backgrounds, diverse fields of research, whom we are incredibly thankful for, I'd also like to take a small moment to thank two people also in the audience who helped us with their expertise and their knowledge, namely Janani and Shane. But yeah, it's kind of no mistake that we lean towards diversity because we are not experts on any given field that we write on. And we believe that to write sort of a global history of the future, you need to integrate the very voices that will shape it. And it's not enough to just talk about the global south and integrate, say, one or two voices for the purposes of diversity, because what we forget is that when we talk about the global south, we are in fact talking about the global majority, a significant one at that, and one that in the future will be much more pronounced. So as we kind of dissected the work of think tanks, researchers, activists, academics, investors, etc., we did not want to develop a rigorous, almost ineligible methodology by which to identify the megatrends, and instead wanted to have the book be available to a wider audience, which is why we came to the Pentagon model. Perhaps we can also have the slide. And through these 5 criteria, we ended up identifying these 12 megatrends, which importantly for today is the fact that they intersect and reinforce one another. Specifically in regards to inequalities, which is kind of the field that I'm working on. And if we want to get into the nitty-gritty of it, one thing that I would like to get out of the way in regards to inequality is that it does not come about naturally. It is rather a result of human processes, beliefs, and systems the most well-established one at that being the Western market economy, which produces vast inequalities, which we then in the aftermath decide, percentage-wise, how much we want to alleviate them through the rigorous and vast redistribution programs in the welfare systems pioneered by the Europeans in the 19th and 20th century, either in Scandinavia with the coalitions or with Bismarck's ulterior motives. But even the welfare systems are not set in stone, as countries nowadays have proven. So, for example, India and Brazil, these have programs. India's job programs, for example, are very successful in doing exactly what they're meant to do, getting people out of slums, getting them into work, while in Brazil, they have innovative programs that target mothers and tie the benefits to the children's education, as well as annual checkups. So, whatever the case may be, it is true that we have chosen an economic system that produces inequalities, but then we have also chosen societal beliefs that amplify and exacerbate those. And it is when you apply the gender lens on these trends, megatrends, that you get even more worrying results, especially when it comes to inequalities. So one thing that is talked about quite a lot is, for example, the wage gap. And as much as people would like it to not exist, it is true that on average, over the span of her lifetime, a woman will earn much, much less in comparison to a woman, simply because she inhabits a body that bears children. And when policy does not take this into account, of course, this is disregarding the unpaid labor that essentially costs women $10.9 trillion globally yearly, then you get things like less paid time off work, less maternal leave, less promotions, and sometimes even a complete exit from the labor market after having children. And of course, there's studies, for example, from the ILO that say that people should not be working more than 45 hours a week. This does not take into account the physical toll that unpaid labor, which is done overwhelmingly by women, has on them. In that regard, Japan is one of the worst offenders, especially when it comes to promotions, due to the work culture of having to stay late, having to go for drinks, etc. That does not take, again, into account the unpaid labor. And then if we look at Scandinavia, we see what I would like to call an sort of Econ 101 paradox, because standard economic theory postulates that if there's high income taxes, then people would be disincentivized to go to work. But instead, we see a positive correlation between high income taxes and labor market participation for women, specifically because how you use that money is very important. When you put it back into childcare, into these rigorous programs, and as we talked about in Brazil, it is the same thing. During the economic boom, they invested quite heavily into their education of the children, and that's how you get a booming middle class. Meanwhile, in the US, you lose about $1 trillion a year simply due to child poverty. That's 28% of the federal budget. And the gender lens, though, does not stop there. It's not simply about economic inequalities. If we construct cities, in the future smart cities, that allow for women's abuse, for example, in the streets through blind spots, like in New Delhi, which is the case, or if we look at the healthcare sector, where we want to push for digitalization, or we want AI to take over, though we haven't done proper research into women's bodies and diseases, we are effectively cementing the very same biases that we currently have. And we simply cannot afford to think in the same ways that we have been taught to. So all of these large changes and challenges enable us to observe that we create the world that we see. And it is also vital that we uphold these democratic values and we try to integrate as many people as possible into this challenging future. Because the things that we talk about, the circular economy, it cannot stand if the links are not stable. And similarly, the planet will not survive if it is only enjoyed by the few. And a controversial thesis, as we have found out in the book, is that everyone is a shaper. But that can only be true if people are empowered to do so. And money is power, and that can turn into political power very quickly. And so when we talk about living in inequalities, we're not just talking about taxation. We're not just talking about these things. What we are talking about is empowering the very same people to create sort of the future. And I guess with that, I can hand over to Manning.
Great, terrific.
And I think we didn't introduce you very properly, Dimitrios. I mean, Dimitrios is a political activist, still a student, and he's with the SOE Institute, which is a Cologne-based think tank. And of course, Garrett has still much more to say about his life. He's a very seasoned megatrend researcher. He has advised the US government, traveled over 60 times to China. But I would ask you to introduce yourself, and the same for Victoria, before you start your talk. So please, I think Benning will just underscore the relevance and also the future of megatrends research. Why is it so important to become future literate? Yeah, not just understanding the history, but also understanding the future.
Thank you, Berthold. Well, I don't know exactly what to say about myself, except I've had a kind of varied experience, including the China experience, going there every year, well, starting in 1981, some 60 trips, carrying on a kind of informal strategic dialogue between the US and China, and many other things. But one of the things that most relevant for here is work on global trends, and I'll give you a little background on that from the US government activities in that affair. One thing I wanted to say is kind of a paradox, I think, that underlies all this. I don't think we've ever known, as human beings, have never known more about the future and never known less. And the paradox, we have a tremendous, we've wired up the planet with the Internet of Things. We have incredible knowledge of what's going on day by day on the planet, whether it's the North Pole, Antarctica, all kinds of evidence. We're able to understand those trends of where things are going, the IPCC being an example of certainly tremendous effort at trying to understand the future of the climate, and PIC people are doing extraordinary work on the 9 boundaries of the environment. And then we look at the megatrends, these global trends. Then we can see demographic trends, and I'll talk about that, and migration and all this. But we have less idea of what's going to be happening than ever. I mean, we are in a very complex, interactive period in human history. And this month, I think we just hit 8 billion people on the planet, each with their own lives, their own perspectives, their own interests, all trying to somehow get along. Well, not necessarily trying to get along, but in any case, so it's a very complex system, and that's where the global trends fit in, because we can foresee trends, but what the hard part is how they interact and what do they produce in terms of, foreseeing a war, Russia attacking, trying to seize Ukraine. We have so many different things going on in the world that we didn't necessarily predict, although we could foresee the trends, the context. And I think that's really important to make that distinction. And going back to the question of global trends and the US government, probably very few people here have heard of the National Intelligence Council in the United States. In fact, a lot of people in Washington have not heard of the National Intelligence Council yet. It's the supreme organization that stands over the 17 intelligence agencies of the US government to provide analysis and a perspective, a presidential daily brief. It has national intelligence officers on all the key countries, on key issues like proliferation or climate or whatever. But one of the things that affected this, and really how we got into global trends, or the US government did, is that in the Cold War, US intelligence community was really focused on the Soviet Union and focused on nuclear weapons, maneuvers, all these things that were secret. You had to have spies, you had to have overhead, reconnaissance to try to find out what's going on. This was the focus. With the end of the Cold War in the early 90s, they started realizing, boy, there's all these other things out there that are threats or concerns for national security that we really don't know very much about, because we've been so focused on all these secrets from whether, not just the Soviet Union, but mainly looking at these kind of clandestine things in a very kind of static bipolar world. So they said, there's all this stuff going on out there that we have to find out about. Ultimately, it becomes urbanization, it becomes climate change, it becomes, other kinds of sources of conflict, it becomes all kinds of issues. So they said, well, we have to we don't know about all this stuff. And the experts are outside the government. And by the way, as you still have to pound on these intelligence people and say, about 98% of what you need to know is not secret. It's just out there. You can, the open press, you can go talk to people, you can go find out what they think. And yeah, it's one of the things I did. I went and talked to the Chinese about what was going on. What do they think about SDI, about the US, about Japan or whatever? And they'll actually talk to you and tell you. You don't just have to send spies in or, you know, find secrets. So what they did is they started these global trends reports. The first one was, I think, released in '97, and it was called Global Trends 2010. And I highly recommend going to just Google global trends. Maybe there's 2010, 2015, 2020, 2030, 2025, 2030. For some reason, the 2035 one, they didn't put 2035, and then the most recent is 2040. And they all come up. They'll be on the National Intelligence Council page, and you can download them. They're absolutely unclassified. That's what they realize. Go out there and talk to the world. It doesn't have to be classified. Just find out what people think and try to put it together. So they started doing this, and after the 2020 report came out in 2004, and the other thing about it, these reports would be published every 4 years after the US presidential election. So there was, and before the president took power, in order, one, so it wasn't political, you didn't know who was going to be elected, and secondly, it was like a strategic document for the new administration. That was the original idea. And it continues to be one of the main reasons for the reports. But so they decided they had to go out. And I read this report in 2004, it was the Global Trends 2020, and I was at the Atlantic Council at the time, and I convinced a friend who was chairman of the National Intelligence Council, let's take this report around the world and get global input. So it's not just a bunch of Americans sitting in a room in Langley, Virginia, figuring out what are the trends out there. Let's go talk to people, find out what they think. I mean, it really is, you know, part of what you've worked on, both of you. And so we went to between 2006 and 2012, we went to, I don't know, 20 countries, some many times, like China, Russia, I mean, every continent. And we would organize meetings with think tanks, and we would bring in government officials, academics, business people, and try to sit down for 2 or 3 days and just talk about what do you see as the major trends affecting the world, and trying to look out 10 or 20 years. So it's not just the current trends, but where are they going? And so they produced, I think, actually some very good reports. As I said, they were completely public. The Chinese loved them, and they translate them within about a month. They'd be in Chinese, but they've been used by certainly governments all over the world, and they're kind of a gold standard. Although I would add that the Defense Concepts and Development Center of the UK Ministry of Defense produces something called Global Strategic Trends every 5 years, and they're very, very good. And these are people who are looking beyond just narrow national security interests. They're looking at, you know, like I said, urbanization, migration, certainly climate change, resource scarcities, what sources of conflict, because we have to understand this world that's evolving and the context, because the threats to security aren't just, well, right now we're hearing a lot about nuclear weapons, presumably Putin won't be that stupid, but in any case, they're coming back into focus. But the point being that there's a lot of issues that threaten our security. I mean, the flooding, the fires, all the things coming out of climate change. So these reports been issued, and they, like I said, they come out every 4 years. They're used by in fact, after the guy that I'd worked with who wrote the Global Trends 2025, I guess it was, he flew to Chicago to brief Barack Obama just after he was elected the first time on these global trends. Obama wanted to understand, what are we facing? What are the trends out there? Crisis, you know, sort of dangers and opportunities. And the opportunities part, I think, is really important. So in any case, these trends reports have had mixed impact. It's very hard for governments to think long term and to actually implement it. And a fellow named Leon Firth, who was National Security Advisor to Al Gore, who should have been National Security Advisor in the United States. Anyway, he worked for years on what he called anticipatory governance. How do you embed people in like White House and other institutions whose job it is to look down the road? So the point being here, there are alternative futures out there. You know, it's what we're going to create. As Marx said, you know, humans make their own history, but not under conditions of their own choosing. So what are those conditions? What do we want? Where do we want to go? Or put it a different way, if we choose this policy, what path does that put us on? If we want to go over here instead of over here, what would we do today to move us in that direction? If we wanted be independent of Russian gas, will we have a Nord Stream 1 and 2? You know, I mean, to put it kind of in blunt terms. But this kind of ability to think about, well, what are the alternative futures? What are credible possible futures that we might or might not want? So what are the ones you don't want? So you want to look at your policies. Is that going to lead you in a direction you don't want to go? Or you want to be in another place? And, you know, is that leading you in that direction? So I think this is, the value of this is really critical for an individual person in their own life, for an institution, for a business, for a government, for the global community. And I think I'm probably running too long here. I would just add that we are at a very, perhaps the key question. I always say that the biggest threat to human civilization, I think, is our inability to cooperate. Because if you look at the things we're facing, climate change, the entire environmental, the ecosystem being threatened, the Anthropocene, which is humans creating a new planet environment that we may not like, if we can't cooperate, we are not going to be able to meet these challenges. And I'll just mention here as the last thing that when we went around the world doing global trends, we tried to convince people to do their own global trends, to create a community of people in their countries to look at these global trends. And I always had this dream that we'd have a global trends community. Then we'd issue a report like the IPCC that would be with Indians and Chinese and Russians and Europeans and Africans and South Americans, and, you know, say, hey, these are the big things you need to worry about and do, and it'd have some credibility. Well, that never happened. But we did encourage, I had a friend in China who got money from the Ministry of Education to do a Global Trends 2030 report back in 2011. And it was very good. He invited me to be a consultant on it, to listen to their vetting of their draft. And it was amazing because, well, the trends are the trends. It's like the laws of physics don't change when you go to Benin or Moscow. You know, there's still the laws of physics, and the trends are still the trends. So they were very similar. So we agreed, and we got funding to do a joint assessment of global trends in 2012, 2013, where we looked together, what are these trends? And we wrote a report together. And but my reason for pushing it, the reason I wanted to do it, because I thought if you look at the big global trends, you say, hey, we're in the same boat. If we don't work together on climate change, especially China and the United States, since we're the biggest powers and the biggest polluters, if we don't work together, you're not going to get really viable global cooperation. So that was the point of the report. And we signed off with, oh, this is really crucial for the two countries to work together. We had the endorsement of 3 former national security advisors, Brent Scowcroft and Hadley and Jones, the former foreign minister of China, Li Jiaxing, and Tang Jiaxuan. So high-level people endorsed this idea that the U.S. and China should have a strategic framework, that cooperation on these issues was the strategic basis of our relationship, and then we can disagree on all the other stuff, right? Well, of course, here we are 10 years later, and where are we? That went nowhere. And that report is still on the shelf. It's a good idea. And it had a lot of support at the time, but particularly with Xi Jinping, I think it's taken China in a very different direction, and we have not helped. So we're not there, but the point being that we have to figure out how do we cooperate as human beings to deal with these challenges, because we can foresee them. And we can see the alternative futures. We could go very bad direction or maybe a much better direction. So I better stop there, but I'll have some comments on some science fiction approaches to that problem. So anyway, that's my comment.
Thank you, Benning. I think it's important to say that we don't have exact data on how the future will look like, but still we have a lot of robust information and data that certain developments like climate change or technological developments will definitely happen. You must have realized that we have a pretty diverse panel. Not exactly 4 generations, that would be exaggerated, but I would say 4 age groups.
2 young people.
And now we come to Victoria ESCOBAR Heredia, who is a researcher with the Institut für Stadtforschung und Strukturpolitik. And I was very happy to exchange views with her on one of our earlier Megatrends and future research sessions at the Mezenata Institute, a civil society think tank here in Berlin. and she's doing a lot of work with young people. She's the chairperson of Schülerpaten, and she will give us her perspectives on future trends and how important they are for the younger generation.
Yeah, good morning. Thank you. Exactly, you already explained a bit what I'm doing. My field of interest is actually sustainability, combating inequality, and education is actually my main issue. And as you mentioned, I'm chairperson of Schülerpaten Berlin. e.V., we offer mentoring for students from Arabic families, low-income families, and we provide them with a local Berliner tutor who support them in school-related stuff. And the idea is that beyond that, they also engage in leisure and cultural activities. And the tutoring takes place at the children's home. So we also want to strengthen intercultural exchange because many of our volunteers don't really have contact to maybe people from Arabic families or also low-income families. So actually at maybe Schülerpaten, what we do or where our work shapes the future is that we try to combat educational equity, contribute, not, and combat inequality, I'm sorry. And through the intercultural exchange, we also contribute to social cohesion. And we try to widen the perspective of the volunteers, and also the students help them to find their way into society. And actually we try to learn like that it's an exchange, like to learn from each other and to understand each other better. Yes, also for the volunteers, it's often really important to understand the life reality of the children because they maybe don't know much about them. And for the children, it's really important that they have someone they can speak to, someone who is just there, listens to them, has like interest in them. And also maybe to get a new perspective on climate action or on culture, because some of our students, they born maybe in Berlin or they're migrants, and they don't never come out of their neighborhoods because maybe the families don't have the ability to travel or to do many cultural activities. And so the volunteers can be a bit of a role model for the children and can help them on their educational and their career planning. I'm really convinced that education is really one important key for combating inequality and to get to sustainable development, because as Dimitrios already said, especially the young people will shape the future. Like everyone is a shaper somehow, and as we heard, there are many uncertainties, dilemmas. How can we have, for example, a general well-being or sustainable development, but how can we also ensure economic stability? And to understand these complex, interconnected issues of a constant changing world, it's really important to equip them with what we can somehow call future literacy. Like, how can I learn to learn? How can I explain problems? How can I answer my questions? And therefore, it's really important first to identify an issue or a problem, then to analyze it further, to then be able to act, like to empower them and not to overwhelm them by all these insecurities maybe or uncertainties. Yesterday we also went to a talk and we learned that we maybe should embrace uncertainty. That can be maybe controversial, but I think that's a bit also with the future, like it opens up much opportunities to shape also the future. So actually it's important to support young people to become actors of change, like to shape the future. And therefore, I really like one concept of global learning, because I think there you can really combine and address social, economic, and also ecological topics. And I think it's really important to link that to the life reality of the learners. Like, what does this has to do with me? Like, how can I maybe influence, or also what are things that I don't have control of, so I can maybe take distance from it and not say that's my responsibility maybe. Yeah, so I really, through my work and experience, of course, top-down processes are really important, but I really believe in the strengths of bottom-up project and work. And yeah, maybe we can also see crises like climate crisis, or now a health crisis, as well as an opportunity how we can shape the future. Yeah.
Thank you, Victoria. Indeed, the concept of global learning is very important. Education is key. And we have been talking a lot about think tanks, but I think the younger generation of think tanks, they prefer to call themselves think and do tanks. Yeah? And we at Freie Universität Berlin, we are not only doing research on and teaching about climate action and sustainability, but the Freie Universität Berlin is also leading in green campus management. I think we saved more than 6.5 million euro because we have put energy efficiency measures and solar panels on our bungalow, Silberlaube, Rostlaube building in Dahlem. And today the Freie Universität Berlin is very active in various alliances, Una Europa, for example, or it's an alliance of 11 European universities, or University Alliance for Sustainability. It comprises 5 universities, including Peking University and Hebrew University and British Columbia University and St. Petersburg University. Yeah? So thinking and acting global is very key, and that's what we have been trying in cooperation with our research partners, our partners from business. We have conducted more than 30 interviews, so in each of the chapter you will find 1 or 2 interviews, people from different background. Here at the panel we have Dimitrios, born in Athens. I think you have double nationality, Colombian and German. Benning is from the US. I'm from Germany. We have all traveled the world like many of our experts. It was not easy to contact them. We've done the work during the COVID-19 pandemic. We had online interviews with all of them, but I think it worked pretty well. And from Switzerland to Mexico to China, India, we have tried to capture relevant voices working on think tanks. Of course, the world has changed, especially after February 24th. We have kind of predicted an emerging multipolar world order rather than a bipolar world order. That could be one issue for discussion, but the floor is now open. We have plenty of time to discuss, to engage with you in a good discussion on global trends. Please introduce yourself with a few words and then ask your question. And we have no moderator, but we will try to manage in between us.
I love that little sign with a question.
Hi.
I mean, it might as well.
Hi, my name is Ruslan Kildeev. I do non-formal education, and part of my work connected with futures work. So I have 2 questions. One to all the panelists, or one of the panelists. Since the topic of these 2 days is paradigm shift, what paradigm shifts do you notice nowadays? And second one to the authors of the book, of the research. What differentiates your research from all the other research you presented or which are out there? What's the, let's call it like UVP, unique value proposition?
Unique selling point, yeah.
I didn't want to put it as a selling point, I said value proposition, but okay, selling point. Thank you.
No, thank you very much for this question. I think Dimitrios will also answer, but I will go first. Is that we wanted to be, first of all, we wanted to be more global because we realize that most of the megatrends research is done by Western strategy consulting firms focusing more on business or investment opportunities. Of course, it's very important to know about megatrends when you want to invest, yeah, or when you want to learn about new business models. But I think there are many other dimensions to future global trends, social dimensions, yeah, and we wanted to also research on them. That's why Dimitrios came in with his expertise in inequality research. We also included migration and all these civilizational points. We also wanted to be a little bit more comprehensive. Defining what is a megatrend or trying to define what is a megatrend. That's usually not done when you read a McKinsey or report, even a Bertelsmann Foundation report. Of course, we value the work of those think tanks. I mean, the German Zukunftsinstitut is doing a lot of good pioneer work, but they're addressing a German audience. Yeah, it's all written in German, and I don't see any voices from the global south. Yeah, so that's maybe the unique selling point of our book. We have a few copies available if you want to buy one, or we have these fancy cards with a code. Yeah, so you can just grab one. It's just 15 euro, the e-copy. This one is 24. And yeah, I think that's what distinguishes us from.
I mean, there's a couple of things that always spring to mind when it comes to unique selling points. The thing that I always say kind of to that question is, you can definitely Google McKinsey, Megatrend, whatever you want, and then you'll get enough information on it. But what we offer is exactly the idea that it shouldn't be sort of a consultancy defining singularly what the megatrend is, and it should be a number of people from all diverse backgrounds and different fields of research that come together and say, here's what I think on this, here's where we're heading, and here's where I think, you know, this country's heading, this region's heading, etc. And the thing that I've also started thinking about is that maybe the contribution of our book is also the fact that we get into these dialogues with people. The fact that we don't exactly write a report, post it on social media, or kind of, you know, disseminate it to the right people, policymakers, right people in that sense, but instead we kind of, you know, ask people what their opinion is. We want to be out there kind of talking to people all the time and seeing what they think, what they believe they can do. Sort of have that as a reference as well if you want to get into a field and, you know, want to do your own work in it. That would be my unique selling point, I guess.
When I read the Megatrends, your book, I thought was pretty unique that you not only identified the trends, but you identified what people were trying to do about them, and then you also included excerpts of interviews with people from all over the world about the trend. And I don't know that I haven't seen any other study that worked that way. I thought that was very good. I thought it was very
showing also the challenges. I mean, the book has an interview with the chief executive of Nature Seychelles. He's very active in global climate action conferences, but of course the Seychelles face a problem because they have to. They live on air passengers, you know, and so there are a lot of dilemmas we also address in this book. Yeah, second. Oh. Mike?
When it doesn't work, just get a bigger hammer.
Does it work now?
Yeah.
Yes.
Excellent. My name is Solveig Nazat. I'm an immunologist by training, and I'm actively working in Health for Future and KLUG, which is a German alliance of climate change and health. And my question is a little bit provocative maybe, because I was wondering who is sitting in those think tanks, because just looking at you, and I see there's one woman and 3 men, and I was wondering if the mega trends are made by, I mean, who is really sitting in there? Because I see there could be a slightly different maybe output at the end if people would have been asked according to what is really, I mean, the people according to the percentages who are living on Earth. And this is my question. How could you make sure that really all people are represented by those think tanks? maybe you can give a perspective, and I would also like to understand this from you. Maybe you also sit there
Emily
to...
Benson, you can mention. Emily Benson, you can
Come on,
mention.
Victoria, get back down here.
Emily Benson from the Green
Do
Economy.
you want me to?
Let's Dimitrios.
Sure,
No,
go ahead.
okay. The megatrends community, like many other policy circles, are probably still a little bit male dominated. I mean, we tried to reach out to very diverse think tanks. I mean, I remember one interview with the Green Economy Coalition, important interview in the chapter on green economy. We talked to Emily Benson. I mean, there are lots of female voices in our book, at least. Yeah, I think we try to have a good diversity in terms of age, in terms of gender, in terms of professional discipline, country background, you know, and that's very important. And that's also one of the unique selling points of our book. To adopt this global perspective. I mean, we could have done better. I tell you very frankly, it was most difficult for us to get interviews in East and Southeast Asia because of hierarchy issue. You know, we wanted to talk to a think tank in South Korea, and we had to talk to the boss, but he was not available. So it's sometimes difficult, even in a ministry in Germany. A vice minister would not just talk to you. I mean, the IMF people, you know, they would not get clearance from their top senior levels to just give an interview for a book project. There are some exceptions, but hierarchy, of course, I mean, university professors and think tankers, you know, they can speak more freely. They want to promote themselves, maybe. And yeah, there are still too few women out there with enough free time also to engage in such a project work, but I think we did a good job in collecting diverse voices. Yeah.
I mean, I'd like to answer your question too, and because I think it's a very, very deep problem. First of all, you're right. I mean, if look at Washington, where I was working. I mean, it's almost all male, all white males that we're doing is sitting around in Langley. That's one of the reasons, of course, we wanted to go out all over the world. And so we diversified in terms of race, ethnicity, and national origin. That was good. But who are you talking? I mean, it's two things. First of all, it wasn't very many women wherever we went. In fact, most places there weren't any women, like in China and most in Africa, very, very few women. And secondly, it's class. Who are you talking to? So you're talking to men who are in the upper middle class or official class or academic class, and particularly in countries other than this in the global south, they're very different than presumably the people living in villages, people living in Kibera and Kenya and Nairobi. So it's both a gender and a class problem. So you're not getting that perspective on their future, and then it's age. I mean, most of the global trends, things I was in, meetings we had, probably the youngest person maybe in the early 30s, but most of them in the 50s and 60s, and of course it's the hierarchy problem. Particularly, you get to, in Russia or China, any of these places, it's the senior people. And then you get the problem, well, only the senior people will talk in the group, because everybody's afraid to say something in front of somebody else. And so you have a real problem getting not just gender, but gender of women and people who are out there whose future is being shaped by these other people. So I think that's a really, really serious problem, but I think they've made a great effort to try to overcome this, but it's just beginning. And then I look at this room, which gives me hope. It's about 2/3 women. If you just go around and count, I think it's about, I don't know, at one point I counted 36 women here as I was sort of looking around. And I think more women need to get into the field, and it needs to be encouraged and opened and all that. But I also think what Victoria's doing is the younger people. Let's start with the youngest, the children and the high school students and the college students, and getting them to see, not only to do future studies, but to think about the fact that, first of all, this world is changing. I wrote a piece for the Atlantic Council 10 years ago. It was technology is changing everything and doing it faster. And we have this acceleration of technological change. I mean, I'm an old guy. We had a dial telephone in my house, right? You know, even a party line at one point, and then a black and white television set. And then along came much later something called a cell phone, which was a big brick, right? And then, you know, you guys, you know, most people now just grow up, this is, you know, this is old tech, right? I mean, everybody's got this. So it's a very rapidly changing world, and that's just in some of the technology, but the impact is huge, and it's changing faster and faster. So how do you get young people who are, their world is changing all the time, right? Oh, it was TikTok last week, maybe it's gonna be something else next week, right? So they're accustomed to the fact that things change. But they need to understand these larger trends because they don't want to just be victims of the change or just passively accepting it, but shaping it and understanding the alternatives. And ultimately, you raise the question of the economic alternatives. I mean, that's something, you know, we're in a very highly unequal and increasingly unequal global economy. You know, Washington consensus and all that. And the economic system has to change if it's going to be viable, because it's creating, you know, conflict, it's the populism, many of the things that are happening, in particular in my country, which is moving toward fascism, certainly very strong fascist movement in the United States, and it's terribly worrisome to me. But that's part of the technological change, it's part of the high inequality. There's a whole lot of things going on here. This is very rapid, and the more that young people can understand this very rapidly changing world, these intersections of these different factors, I think the more they can help them shape their own futures, but shape a broader future, and see that the given is not the only alternative. You can change things. They are being changed, and you can decide, well, what change do you want? Where do you want the future to go that's feasible, and how do you get there? So I think the generations, and frankly, I know this sounds trite, but I think only the women can save us now, frankly. That's my view, because I think that women have to be a much bigger and maybe dominant voice, perhaps, in politics and so much of our lives, because I think that I have more trust in the judgment, not all women or anything like that, but I just think there's a very big need to have a different kind of leadership, a different type of perspective that tends to come more from women, the women I've known anyway, in leadership positions. So I'm very big on this change has to, and so what the question you asked, it represents all these issues, but it's absolutely critical, and it's very important to see when we look at these global trends reports, who were the people that put them together, who were questioned, who are part of the, and do they really represent, you know, how somebody in a favela in Rio de Janeiro is thinking about their future and what's possible. So anyway, that's my 2 cents on that question.
Yeah, we have more questions, I see, thank you.
Yeah, first of all, thank you for the introduction to Megatrends, the presentation. Going back to the paradox, this future paradox, where we have on one side a future as a result of collaboration, but on the other side we should expect this multi-polarized world. What, in your experience, how willing are countries to work together, leaving their difference beside? For example, in your experience with China and USA, or
Dimitrios and myself, we are political scientists by training, and we try to be extra careful in writing the chapter on multilateralism and and the future of international cooperation. I think if you have traveled the world, and all of us have traveled the world, I mean, we were not surprised, say, that relatively few countries, unfortunately, joined the sanction regime of the West on Ukraine. And the world, we believe that the world is not moving into a simple bipolar world order again. We talk about multipolar world order, which is still resented by many political leaders here in Germany. I mean, if you read the book, you know that China, Russia, and India are deeply entangled in a couple of institutions, such as the BRICS, the Asian Investment and Infrastructure Bank, the Belt and Road Initiative, the New Development Initiative, and so on. So if you know about these initiatives, if you know about these structures, you are not surprised that China, even though Xi Jinping is not a fan of Putin, rather vice versa, rather the other way around. But it's going to be very difficult, but there is still a lot of cooperation going on. I mean, we are approaching the COP27 conference in Sharm el-Sheikh very
Tomorrow.
yeah, very soon. And 35,000, 40,000 people will attend that conference from different strands of society. I mean, it started off as a meeting among diplomatic leaders, you know, but you have so many side events, you know, and even when Donald Trump withdrew from the Paris Agreement, I mean, climate action was still going on in the US at the provincial level, at the city level, at the business level, even faster than before, you know. I mean, so it's sometimes our media focus on, you know, big government politics, sensational news, and now a lot of attention is paid on the re-ideologization of China. Of course, it's true, China faces a lot of challenges, but perhaps, I mean, a few months or a few years later, I mean, it's hard to predict if the ideological grip will really reach out to each and every place in China and shape the economy. China used to be like the wild west of capitalism. It used to be pretty liberal and free, and then COVID-19 came and was a kind of a game changer, and also, of course, the new regime. But it's difficult to anticipate, and it's good to continue with a pragmatic spirit and seize opportunities, and we cannot save the world or shape the world. Climate, new technologies, pandemics, we need global cooperation, and there are still avenues, and thousands of experts are engaged in such work. Yeah.
I tend to kind of joke that we have the four MADs, you know, mutual assured nuclear destruction, which became the acronym NAD, but we have a mutual assured economic destruction, mutual assured climate destruction, and I would add mutual assured cyber destruction. And all these areas, the climate can get us all, right? If the global economy comes down, and it could, this is a mutual destruction for all of us. And then cyber now, we have huge, if you think of the internet, if the internet were to go down, we would be in worse shape than we were in the Middle Ages. I mean, Middle Ages, people could go grow their own food out there, you know, whatever it was, few hundred million people on the planet. 8 billion people can't go out and grow their own food if cyber goes down. If the internet went down, there's no banking system, there's nothing. Your utilities, your banking, your food, your water, everything runs on the internet, right? So we have to preserve that. And we're screwing around with it with cyber attacks and all the other stuff. And if you read the Financial Times today, the former senior military official in the UK talks about the vulnerability of the undersea cables. 95% of all the data in the world travels on undersea cables, and the Russians have developed a very sophisticated way to go down and cut those cables. And as he says, Putin knows they're vulnerable. There are only 200 of them. And that would bring down the internet. I mean, so we have to think, hey, we have to globally protect the environment and the climate. We have to protect the global economy that functions. We have to maintain the cyber system that we are totally dependent upon. I mean, you know, these things go down, and that's the end of our lives. We can't go out and grow our own food, right? And then, of course, we have to not blow ourselves up with nuclear weapons, which was the original idea. So we are involved, we are in a system where we're kind of blowing apart a system that we're all dependent upon. And so what point, I mean, you asked the question that I think is exactly the right question. I don't even have an answer because I don't know how it's going to evolve. I mean, we used to have pretty serious cooperation with China. I mean, I was involved in it, even in the military sphere. And, you know, there was real goodwill on both sides, I think, to try to work on climate and a lot of other issues. So I did a report with the Asia Society called A Roadmap for U.S.-China Collaboration on Climate Change and Energy. And we really worked, the Chinese didn't co-author it, but we consulted them. We spent a lot of time with it. We ran all the policy recommendations past the Chinese. And that was, our co-chair was Steve Chu, who became Secretary of Energy. John Holdren, who became the science advisor to President Obama. We had the Todd Stern, who was the climate negotiator, was part of it. We have very senior people on the Chinese side who were consulted on this. It became the basis. The recommendations were in the Hu Jintao Obama joint communique in 2009, November 16th communique. And there was all this, we've had probably 100 collaborations between the US government and China on energy and climate since 1979. So there is this whole basis that's there, and it's all being kind of blown up at this point. And I mean, I put the biggest concern about Xi Jinping has taken China in a direction I do not think it had to go, where he was terrified that the party was losing control and wanted to consolidate party control, use the United States as the evil empire to be attacked and to be the enemy, to unite people internally. And you see the crackdown in Hong Kong and Xinjiang and all this. I don't think it's popular in China. My friends in China who I know, who I've interacted with for nearly 40 years, are not happy about this. I hope there's a change. But I would say for China, they need friends. Climate change is hitting China very hard. They have severe drought. They had an unbelievable heat wave this last summer. The glaciers are melting, so that the water situation is going to get just worse. Sea level rise is going to be a real threat to much of the coastal China, Shanghai. And the demographic collapse of China. Their own Shanghai Academy of Social Sciences predicted, just did a report, came out this year, that this coming year they'll start to decline in population, and that China will go from 1.42 billion people to 587 million by the end of the century. That's a collapse. And that's going to be old people with very few young people. Who's going to do the work? I mean, you go on and on. They face real problems. Well, you need friends. You need to be working well with the world. You need to cooperate. I mean, we face all our problems too, so I'm not just putting it on China. I'm saying managing 8 billion people on this planet, all their needs, their concerns, their fears, an economy that works for them, and maintaining, this is something that we could either lead to huge amount of conflict. It's your fault that my country is in trouble, or within my country. Look at the United States, the kind of unbelievable attacks on the Democrats from the Republicans as if they're pedophiles and they're destroying the country and all that. So within countries, as situations deteriorate, you'll get tremendous conflict, and then between countries. So we're headed in a way, it could be very, very disastrous. The Ukraine itself could turn into even a nuclear conflict. I don't think it will, but it could. And it's certainly undermining global.
Some more
anyway,
questions,
I'm sorry. Okay, but anyway, it's a very uncertain period, and we need to figure out how to cooperate. And your generation.
Okay, let's have a few more questions. Thank you. Thank you.
Sorry about that.
Thank you. I think I was a next one. So I have a question for Victoria, because I think looking at all those mega trends, that all means for everybody a lot of new things. So generally a lot of learning is, and my question is, because you do hands-on activities with kids, and you all said the kids are the future, they need to learn the right things. So I think I would be interested to understand what are your key learnings about learning, what you have done here, and what of that is transferable to all the other countries in the world, and maybe are there also other let's say, trends, how people learn, and I mean not only technology, but also methodology, and maybe also society, who might be more open to see and include maybe also younger ones. So that would be my question about global learning. Thank you.
Yeah.
Because just one more, because I think to understand and to learn is a first step before you act, and we all want to see action, and this is why I'm so interested in learning. Thank you.
Yeah, like the basis for this process is really 3 steps. Really first recognize what is an issue and problem, and therefore of course you need skills, like first to recognize, then to evaluate what does that mean in a context to me, to others, and when we can analyze the situation, then that enables us to take action on it. that's a bit like the structure behind it. Of course, it's not that easy, but I think it's really important, first of all, to learn how can I inform myself, like also digital literacy, like social media or in general information. What is a good source? Like on what can I trust? And then further on, how can I, if someone, I don't know, person A says something in the internet, for example, I'm really shocked. I have family in Colombia, and recently we had elections, and people, it's so like communication on social media is so popular, yeah, even people who are educated, who are like upper middle class, they so easily fall on false statement, and they just send it to other people's without even reflecting, like, could that be real? Like, they just take everything, absorb it, and I think that's the first step to really recognize, is this like, can I rely on this information? And then the next step is really, yeah, how can I answer my questions? Where do I get the information? And then also the synthesis, like how can I bring it together? What makes me able to act? And of course, this is really, it's maybe sounds really easy in the 3 steps, but of course it needs also practice. And what the learnings I had is really interaction, group work. Like I was in a formative school, and we really from small on, we had to do our own projects, our own presentation. So I think group work and also the relation or the cooperation with local organizations, so that I also see, okay, this is not just a school topic I have to learn because my teacher tells me, or but really, how does this apply in my context? Like, where can, for example, growing food, urban gardening, or inequality, like how maybe in my class the diversity, like how come some people have different resources than other? So yeah, and I think there was a second question, the benefits of it, of their learning. I think, yeah, of course, you mean the learners themselves, or do we have a microphone?
I was just asking, so the key thing is, a key learning is that they have to see the benefits of their learning. Then it was efficient, which is normal. Yeah, I understand this. So my second question was, what about institutions then? So about the learning of individuals, yes, I do understand. If you understand that you have benefits from it, you of course intensify your learning. What about institutions? Is there also learning, and how to transfer this to other countries, Global South, etc., from your work, from your research work?
Yeah, I mean, I must admit that really education for sustainable development or climate change education, I really also in Germany sometimes feel that it's not really taught in school. It really depends on teachers and their engagement, but it's not really compulsory in the plans of contents. So here I also think there are many, what we see is these bottom-up movements, like for example Schülerpaten, or there are many other organizations in the climate change education field. So I think this really has to be institutionalized. Or example, also in the book you had an interview with someone from Brazil, and there's also an organization Teach the Future, I think, and they really trying how to incorporate megatrends in daily class, and not just have external projects, maybe where you can reach some of the pupils, but really institutionalized in school system. And I think that's still missing. Like,
Thank you.
completely.
Another question.
I'll do it shortly because I think we don't have much time. My name is Andrew. I come originally from Croatia, but I've been living here for 3 years. I work in the public broadcasting institution IRD, and I'm responsible for the strategy of program there, along with my team. And this discussion is very interesting in what Victoria said about young people, and that interests me the most. And I don't even know how to summarize my question, but I'll try. From my perspective of these mega trends and what I was born in '95, so I'm in the brink of this 2 generations and everything. And nowadays I have a lot of contact with younger generation, and for some reason when I look back at my parents and some of the panelists here which lived in when these trends didn't even exist, I consider that we maybe in the past lived for something and that we pursued some other dreams, and it was a bit slower and everything was more, I don't know how to even explain it, made more sense. And nowadays we live in these fast food cultures which just arise one day, and what Victoria said, just one day something pops up and it's simply a megatrend and it involves the whole world. And from my perspective, I think we live really on the edge of both sides. So it's either a war and crime and completely no democracy. On the other side, you live in a big city, you can change your job, and in one day you have access to everything. And for me, it's just I'm worried. What would we leave for this new generation? How will these mega trends then influence this younger generation? Because yeah, what is this shaping up for the younger people? And the other question is actually how the megatrends influence megatrends itself. I mean, can some of these megatrends influence each other, like migration influences inequality, and democracy, health and nutrition, and so on. So maybe if you can give a perspective on that, and of course the young people, because what Dimitrios said, the money is power, and nowadays I see a lot of young people who don't have access to education, on the other hand are very smart, but unfortunately not wealthy and able to, like I said, access anything what they want for their future. And on the other hand, you have people who in 1 week become, I don't know what, the biggest magnets of this whole economy and everything. And you have people like, I'm just going to name it, Elon Musk, who want to show, I don't know, some kind of power with the money and these latest news with everything. For example, just a recent example with Twitter takeover and everything. I've been following that for the past days. He took over one company in order to maybe have a better democratic view of social media or whatever. On the other hand, he's firing people on an email with memes and stuff like that. I mean, that doesn't even comply with anything that was mentioned here with Megatrends. So I'm just stunned by what's happening now. So maybe just a perspective on that.
I think Dimitrios will take the answer. He coined the term tech feudalism. So perhaps he will. You didn't coin it, but you refer to it.
Absolutely not. Okay, so there's a couple of aspects in there.
Just short, I think people want to go to another panel. Just,
So what are we leaving? I got 3 questions out of this. The one was, what are we leaving for the next generations? Right. I mean, good question. That's kind of what we're trying to figure out, because there's these trends that are kind of larger than life, and we are all involved in them, and it feels like sometimes you're just in this kind of river that's flowing towards the sea, and it's inevitable. You can't really latch onto anything. You just keep going. Now, I don't think the world is as polarized as we either are on the brink of extinction or we're just living very well, because if you grew up, I mean, I think we grew up around the same time. Probably you have a little bit more experience because I was born in 2000. But what I grew up with was essentially kind of a decade up until 2008, where everyone taught me that the history had ended, everything is nice, there's no more war, or at least we didn't care for it. Now it's a little more visible, perhaps, that all of this is still going on, and we actually care for it a little bit more. So I guess the defining question of our times is, will we kind of acknowledge these trends and try to shape them ourselves, or will we just kind of move along and let people who have a little bit more power, and maybe now we can transition to the Twitter question, what happens when you have all this power? What happens when you have all of this money and you are driven by sheer ideological conviction. Because the Twitter takeover is a great example of there's no substance to it. There's really nothing behind it. Musk does not necessarily believe in anything. He has an idea of what free speech should be, or what what does he call it? The public, let's call it agora, should look like. But it's not really that. It's more like free speech for the people, for his followers. And so that's where I guess I think I was also told by my friend Shane that techno-feudalism was coined by Varoufakis. Nice coincidence there. But that's where techno-feudalism comes in, because we are already living in a very much centralized social media age where Facebook basically owns Instagram, owns WhatsApp, owns Facebook, of course, Meta, let's say. And then you have the upcoming projects to try and save face from the fact that they never really developed their social media as they should have, to not cause wars, not cause civil wars, not kill people, not allow hate speech on their platforms. And now this extends over to Twitter. And so all of these spaces one by one are kind of leaving our reach, and then we can't really save them. Because obviously there's quite a lot of good suggestions out there, for example, to kind of collectively own these social media platforms, but that requires a lot of power, and that requires a lot of organizing. But if you have billions, and if you can borrow against your own shares, you don't have to do any of that, because you can just buy the platform. And I guess on the question of influencing one another, I guess I should have also made that more clear. This is another great example that we have, is the example of Ireland, and it's what happens when you have free water, a lot of natural resources, and a data center wants to come in. Well, what happens in Ireland is essentially that once you add an extra data center, you're basically adding an extra small Irish town to the electricity grid. And then you require about 500,000 liters of cooling per day for these data centers. And that, of course, has implications for inequality, because to attract those very data centers, you need to have lower taxation rates. You need to be attractive to those multinationals. And that's kind of how you get this unequal society, and you kind of lose control over it, because then Irish Water comes out and says, you people should actually be saving water, and then the people respond, you should not be giving our water to a new data center every once in a while. And so, of course, and then every single megatrend, once you apply the lens of another on top of it, becomes a whole new concept, kind of. So hopefully I answered some of your questions.
I'd like to just add in here a more hopeful note. I have a friend who's a science fiction writer, Kim Stanley Robinson, who wrote a book that was published a couple of years ago called The Ministry for the Future. And before he wrote the book, he said, I want to write a book that's where things go right, where we solve problems rather than just, because so much of science fiction now is this kind of dystopian, crazy shit. But this book is extraordinary because he really knows his science, his climate. It's a really climate change book. And he knows his economics. And it takes place starting about 3 years from now. And it goes through 2050. And I always say to him, well, it's kind of a plan, He gets to 2050 where we're now on a rewilding, we're bringing carbon out of the air, we're getting a more equal and viable economy, so we're more towards sustainable economic and environmental path for humanity. So he's trying to look, well, how will we get there? And I think I really recommend the book. Obama loves the book. It's gotten a lot of attention, but it's called The Ministry for the Future. And the minister happens to be, who gets appointed, happens to be Irish. She was the former Irish foreign minister, and she's supposed to represent the future people, future flora and fauna of the planet in current policy. So that's sort of the idea. And two things I'll just add about it. One is it's got the most powerful opening description of what climate change could mean that I've ever read. It just takes place at the beginning in India with a wet bulb 35 degrees of heat wave over this area where millions of people die. But you see it through the lens of this one guy who's trying to help people. And it really gives you instead of looking at temperature rise or anything, here's what could be like for human beings. And of course, the heat wave that we've had in India last year had a lot of this element. So it gets you, that's why they create this Ministry for the Future. And the other point that's interesting is that he really focuses on changing the incentives in the economy. So the minister is out there convincing the central bankers to adopt something called carbon coin, where you get paid in carbon coin to sequester carbon or to not burn the carbon that you control, to rewild. You change the whole incentive system within a capitalist system of sorts, and you get people to do the right thing. They get rich from doing right rather than harm to the planet. So it brings back the idea that we can change the system. We can, if we kind of understand what alternatives are, how it is working, how it's not working properly, and find new pathways, which of course, you younger people, have a nice day. You're gonna have them, it's pretty messed up, good luck, but you know, there's alternatives, and I urge you to kind of look to alternative, positive futures too. I mean, it's not all bad.
Yeah, I think we are having a really good discussion. Let's go on for about 10 to 15 minutes. We could have this wonderful room until 11:30, but I think let's try to be, let's try to have a few more questions. And Stefan, and here.
I think I have to leave earlier, but I don't want to leave without this question and your answers. Stefan, I work for a peace NGO through global education. The question I need answers from you guys is, what gives you hope? You as Megatrend experts, I would not want to leave this room without hearing from you guys what gives you hope. And I would appreciate if your answer could be brief, and if your answers could, the speaking time could be evenly distributed among the four of you. Thank you. That's a challenge, I know. Thank you.
Another selling point of our book is that we are more critical, or we also include critical thinking and critical aspects on megatrends, but that doesn't mean that we are pessimistic. So I pass on to Dimitrios.
Right. I'll be very brief. I think how incredibly smart young people are and how well educated young people are. And I'm actually excited to hear what Victoria has to say on this, because I think I don't see the megatrends and think to myself, oh, someone's going to come up with we're going to solve inequality easily. That's not what I think is happening. But I think people are educated enough, and there's enough solutions out there to the point where someone, at some point, that idea will find the right person, and then we will build a better world. And I think that starts with kids.
I think, we live in a kind of a knowledge society, you know? Like we have a lot of knowledge, but of course you have to evaluate like what you need from all this information. And education, I really believe is key, but of course education is also linked to inequality. So to your social status, like it's not open for everyone. So there are restrictions, limited to your origin. And I think it's getting better, and access to education is growing, but still there are restrictions.
The Wired magazine had a cover about 15, 20 years ago, and it had this young schoolgirl in a little schoolgirl outfit. She's about 10 or 11, and she had won the national, she was the smartest kid in Mexico, won the national math contest, and she lived in a slum right by a garbage dump. You know, and that was the point. And I think that there's the Joy's Law. There's a guy named Bill Joy who was a computer guy. And Joy's Law was most of the smartest people don't work for you. And I say it, most of the smartest people are not in the United States or Germany or any, you know, smartness is kind of distributed among all human beings. And, you know, we're like 5% of the population of the world in the United States, or 6%. So all those smart people are out there who are not getting that chance. So many of them, like this young girl got some publicity, but really, that's the problem. How do you get this, all these people have the, you know, if we mobilize all the smartest people in the world to focus on climate or something, you might come up with some great solutions, but they don't even have a chance to be part of the dialogue in so many countries, in so many parts of this country or the United States. So this challenge is really critical.
Yeah. That also brings us a bit back to the gender question, or in general diversity question. Of course, I think if we would have more perspectives on the future, or on megatrends, or what should shape the future, then also the solution would become more diverse. Like, or
Yes.
And I think we have a lot of positive change happening. I mean, these days I've attended a couple of conferences on digitalization and sustainability. I think there's much more awareness now within the digitalization community that that digitalization has to work in the context of sustainability. Yeah. The Bits and Bäume conference here at Freie Universität, at Technical University Berlin, for example, yeah, and we see more ethical commissions engaging in ethically inspired regulation for biotechnology and technologies and so on. And even in sustainable finance, I think we have a relatively strong green finance, sustainable finance movement with a new taxonomy. Of course, there's a lot of greenwashing, but we have a lot of civil society organizations critically monitoring what is happening. And the German government has issued a report shifting the trillions towards the trillions of the financial industry, the pension funds, yeah, not towards sustainable development directions. That would have not been imaginable. I think 10, 15 years ago, it was just a bunch of activists, advocating for green finance, and that has now developed into a kind of a movement, and not only in Germany. I mean, I reviewed a master thesis comparing green finance in China and in Germany, yeah? And sustainable finance, green finance is one of the chapters in this book, and with 2 contributions of professors from the ETH Zurich. ETH is very prominently represented here at the Berlin Science Week. I think there are lots of positive signs out there.
But I would add here that if you had a depression, you can come out of it. There's a lot of things you can come back from, but climate change is just moving right on. Whether if we ignore it or don't move fast enough, it doesn't care what we do. It's just going to happen, and we're headed towards some pretty serious tipping points. So the question is whether we're doing enough, fast enough. It's not, because I totally agree that a lot is happening, but we can't say to climate change, well, hold on a minute, stop doing that. We've got to get our act together. It's just going to keep on happening. Whereas if you had a depression, you can come out of a depression. You can come back from it. But a global nuclear war and climate change are existential threats that you're not going to come out of. You got to deal with them and either prevent them or mitigate them. So we've got a very big challenge ahead, and let's hope that we can meet it. But the geopolitics that you were suggesting is a real impediment right now to focusing on what we really need to focus on. There's a hell of a lot of energy. Just think of the money going into militaries, the impact of the current conflict, just in terms of emissions, and the diversion of energies and ability to cooperate because of wars and geopolitics. So geopolitics is becoming a very big enemy of cooperation on climate and the other issues.
But we should not let it overshadow each and every avenue of cooperation.
Not at all. It should make it spur as to why we have to do it.
Yeah.
You have a question there? You're holding your question card.
Yeah.
I'm a physicist and a science communicator, and I have a question. What about the new media, the role of the new media in this discussion? Is it enough? Because the new media, the social media, I would say, tend not to deal about these megatrends. What is your opinion?
Dimitrios, you want to take this one?
Do you want to start?
Well, I would just say that there's so much focus on current issues and divisions and war, and to get people to look at the bigger picture is very hard. I mean, it's a space-time problem. Let's put Einstein in here, but it's a space-time problem. The space is geographical in issues, and time is looking out from the past into the future. How do we bring those together and find understanding and solutions and focus people on those? I'm not optimistic at the moment. I hope we can get there.
Hi, I just wanted to ask, and thank you very much for the talk and the interesting discussion so far. So when it comes to future research and megatrends in general, what is the role of, or can there be more of a role of, developing economies? Because I think the BRICS, which have been mentioned a few times here thus far, are more the exception rather than the rule. So when it comes to smaller economies that really struggle to make much economic impact and have much of a footprint on the world and politics as they're developing thus far, are there ways that they can shape the trends rather than just be purely shaped by the trends? Because we see now recently, especially with events such as COVID, huge impacts being disproportionately affecting towards really small economies, even just Sri Lanka as compared to the larger example of one of the BRICS, India. And I'd like to briefly ask as well, hopefully this is quick, has anyone's thinking changed in very recent times? Because I realize that the book itself has come out some months ago. Since then, there's been destabilization of politics within the United Kingdom, for example. There's been, I mean, even some time ago, the invasion of Ukraine. So there are a lot of extremely influential events happening in a very recent time frame. Has this changed thinking on megatrends, or are the megatrends and this field of research flexible enough that they already accommodate for these types of events?
When it comes to inclusiveness, let's get back to the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development of the United Nations. I mean, even me, having worked on United Nations policy for a long time, I was very positively surprised how this 2030 Agenda with the 17 development goals developed in such a powerful reference framework all over the world. I mean, it's not a Western concept which has been imposed on the United Nations and then to some African countries. It's really a very inclusive agenda, and a lot of projects, cooperation projects, but also other projects and companies in all parts of the world, startups in all parts of the world are referring to it. And there's a lot of support to keep it as inclusive as possible. And no government has dared to back out of this agenda, even not Russia, by the way, you know, and even not Trump. So I want to stress the importance of this global reference framework. And in a way, the Megatrends framework is perhaps most interesting for these strategy consulting firms for business and investment opportunities. But we wanted to make a contribution to also make it more comprehensive and to adopt a more critical and inclusive approach towards megatrend. Lots of destabilization has happened, yes, but restabilization will also occur. Whether it will be better than before or worse than before, I mean, I must admit that I foresee serious problems. I've always highlighted the inequality challenge. I think we have not seen the end of the road. Many megatrends, including inequality, also climate change, will accelerate in the next years to come, and we have to really put all our efforts, join hands at the global level to fight these big challenges. And sometimes people react allergic when they hear megatrend. Maybe the megatrend is like a tsunami. It will just overroll me. I just have to be passive. I can't do anything. But that's why we also put a lot of emphasis on the role of shapers, you know, on think tanks, and come across with these little bit theoretical proposition that everybody can be a shaper, can make a contribution. And our book resounded very well among people who work with young people, with children, you know, like Victoria and a few others, you know, Children for a Better World, a big foundation run by the BMW Quandt and Langenscheidt Foundation in Munich. They also approached us. They want to organize a big youth congress next year here in Berlin. and also work with our book. So I think,
I'd like to respond to your question too with a little more hopeful thing. We were at this very interesting Africa meeting yesterday here at Berlin Science Week. We're going to see a lot of solutions coming from small countries or just individuals out there. We have a trend we didn't really talk about is the democratization of technology. And this technology is making what I have written for UNCTAD about a better, cheaper, faster, scalable approach to development. Instead of building huge, the World Bank goes, build a huge power plant for $1 billion, takes 10 years. Well, instead of that, you do scalable solar or scalable water purification plants that can be done in every village or something. There's a whole, the technology is making possible an approach that's new and different. Secondly, you're going to see a lot of innovation coming, especially out of Africa. We've already seen that, and with M-Pesa and mobile payments and stuff. But the other trend that I think this is a trend I'd like to see encouraged. But we are moving, I call it peak globalization, that the amount of stuff, physical stuff being moved around the earth is actually, I think, already peaked, but it will decline. That is liquid fuels, food, toys and cars, all this stuff that we move. We can do more and more production of energy, food, and products where they're consumed, which would have hugely beneficial environmental impact. You're not moving this crap all over the world. It would have potentially huge impact on inequality, because you'd have local jobs. But just think of it. Renewable energy. You don't move renewable energy around the world. And by the way, the one thing nobody ever says, the fuel is free forever. You never pay for the sun or the wind. You're not paying Russia or Saudi Arabia or Texas for your fuel every day like an addict. Why we don't make that argument about renewables is beyond me. From an economic point, why do you want to pay for the fuel? You have to pay for the solar panels and all that and the grid, but not the fuel. Secondly, you can produce more and more food locally with vertical farms, with the new technologies, cultured meats and all that, but more connection between the rural areas and the cities through there's all kinds of, we've written about this problem. So you could do more production of food where it's consumed. And then with 3D printing, advanced manufacturing, AI, you'll probably be able to make a lot more products where they're consumed. So you move less stuff around the world. I think that's a better, much more sustainable and resilient world, but it's also technologically possible and will get better over time and should be the focus. And that gives more potential for small countries to not be dependent totally on getting their energy from Saudi Arabia or getting all their food from the Midwest of the United States or their products all from China. This changes the potential for how we organize the global economy that would be a far more sustainable and far more, I think, equality and more local, as Marx would put it, local control of the means of production. So, we have to think in these ways that can harness technological trends that already exist, and also look to the innovation coming from people in these other countries that are not, the big countries and the wealthy countries, but they're going to find ways to do things we never thought of that might be much better, including in healthcare. So there's a lot of things out there that I think could give us some hope, and that we need to harness trends that are already, foreseeable. But we have to see them and say, hey, this is a better way to do things.
Benning, I think we have to wind up. We are getting signs here from the technicians.
People waiting for the next thing to
Thank
happen.
you very much. And we have a few copies available and also the flyers here. Bye-bye. Thank you.
Well, this was fun.
Is this off?